Hi guys, we're presenting measuring the new choke points, mobile app store availability as a mechanism of internet censorship. So, when most people picture internet censorship, most time they picture a blocked website, a government tampering with the DNS, filtering traffic somewhere between you and a server, and there's a mature ecosystem for measuring exactly what tools like Uni or Censored Planet. They watch the network layer continuously all over the world. So, but censorship has been quietly moving up the stack. A growing share of it now happens on the mobile app store. So, here's a pretty cool key fact: Apple and Google each run a separate store for each country. So, if a government wants to stop an app from appearing, it doesn't need to touch the network at all. It just tells Apple or Google to pull up that app from the national storefront. And for a typical smartphone user, an app that isn't in the store effectively doesn't exist. So, no firewall is required at all. This, in essence, is not at all hypothetical. It's real and it's happening now. So, in July 2024, Apple removed dozens of VPN apps from the Russian App Store after demand from the state regulator. I can't pronounce this guy's name. Roskomnadzor. Apple had pulled VPNs from the China store since 2017, and one audit by the Tech Transparency Project found over 3,000 apps missing from the China store. India banned hundreds of apps in 2020, including TikTok. So, the mechanism is real and it's powerful. The problem is visibility. The network layer gets measured constantly, but the App Store layer is measured far less consistently. That's the gap that we set out to fill. Cool. So, how do you measure this? So, the nice thing is that the data is public. So, Apple has its own lookup API that takes a country's parameter. We give it the app's ID and country code, and then it tells us whether the app exists in that country's store or not. So if the app is there, we get the result back. If it's been removed, we get an empty result for the exact same ID, and that contrast is basically our signal. So yeah, we built. So the first thing we did is we built 32 apps across 5 categories. We have 9 VPNs, we have 6 secure messengers, 6 news apps, and 5 topically sensitive apps. So crucially, the 6 neutral control apps are actually a calculator. So things like the weather app, Candy Crush, and these are things that no government should really care about. So this controls the trick that basically tells us what's censorship and what's just ordinary noise. So we basically validated every app ID against the US store before including it. So yeah. Then the next step that we did was we took a country list of 14 storefronts. So we took known censors like China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, India, and then we compared to a free expression baseline like the US, Germany, and Japan. And then every country also has its own Freedom House Freedom on the Net score, so we can line our results up against an independent measure of repression. Yep. So then the third thing we did was we created a pipeline that queries all 32 apps across all 14 countries, so 448 combinations, and it caches every raw response, so the whole analysis reproduces it offline. So one important design point: we keep errors separate from unavailable, so we never really mistake a network hiccup for a removal. And the whole thing runs from inside our laptop, so we never touch the network inside the censored country, and no one's put at risk. So that's a pretty useful ethical advantage for us. So yeah.
So moving on, we have the heat map of available apps for countries. So for the rows, we can see every app, and the columns or the countries. Red meaning that the app is unavailable in that country. So when we look at China, pretty much every single app is unavailable. So every VPN up here is blocked, along with secure messenger apps like Telegram, WhatsApp, along with news like BBC or New York Times, and other apps like Grindr, Quran, Candy Crush Saga, Google Translate are also unavailable. So here are the stats. So 88.5% of sensitive apps are missing from our data set. So 100% VPNs, 100% of secure messengers, 67% of news, and 80% of topical apps. And for Russia, 8 out of 9 VPNs are removed. So pretty much every VPN is unavailable in Russia, while messengers and news are still there. And also there's another pattern. If we look here, in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, every LGBTQ dating app are unavailable across those regions. And then India, they have two removals, which is Cloudflare and the Quran app. and Vietnam had 0 sensitive apps missing, except for 1 control. And now we had baseline of US, France, Germany, Japan, which had 0 sensitive removals.
Okay, so a skeptic should basically ask, how do you know these missing apps are censorship and not just a coincidence? So we have two answers. The first is validation. Our snapshot independently reproduces every documented removal we tested. So the Russia VPN purge, the China New York Times removal, Signal in China, all of them. So straight from raw availability data without telling us, which pipeline to look into. And if it can rediscover the known cases, we trust it with the unknown ones. The second source is this chart. So on the x-axis is each country's independent internet freedom score. On the y-axis is the share of the sensitive apps missing. So the less free a country, the more apps disappear. The correlation is clearly negative. So spare an R of minus 0.62. And here's the part we're most proud of, the honest part. So a missing app does not necessarily mean that it's government censorship, and our own data proves it. So Candy Crush, which is one of our neutral controls, as mentioned earlier, is missing in Russia. And that's not because of the Kremlin, it's because the game's maker pulls out of Russia over sanctions. So the BBC app shows up as missing in the United Kingdom, of all places actually, because there's a separate British version of the app, so the global one just isn't published there. That's also a false positive from the regional app variants. So we don't just count the red squares documented, strongly inferred or ambiguous. Separating censorship from coincidences is a core contribution, and for us, it's not really an afterthought. So yeah.
So I'll be going over some limitations of what our study is not, and then I'll be going over some takeaways as well as some considerations for future work. So of course, our study is just a single snapshot, like a day really, of the current state of our topic, and it's not really like a time series, so we don't have so much data. And so all we do is kind of just catch the current state and then recover the history by like cross-referencing with like very known events. And additionally, we cover only the App Store, so popular providers like Google Play and sideloading are out of scope. This makes our numbers like have a much lower bound, and it also reduces our sample size. Additionally, our app basket was assembled by a US-based team, and so we probably don't have the awareness to include the apps that are truly the most important in each country. Finally, Iran is a category of its own because Apple runs no store there because of the sanctions, and therefore we literally couldn't measure it at all and include it in our study. However, even with these limits, the bottom line is strong. Within a single afternoon of public API queries, we reproduced every documented removal and drew a clean, interpretable map of App Store censorship. We saw a near total removal in China, a VPN purge in Russia, a very consistent LGBTQ+ pattern across the Gulf states and Turkey, and we saw a solid correlation with internet freedom scores. This confirms the initial hypothesis and premise of the paper that we came into in the first place, that the App Store layer of censorship is a very real censorship choke point that network protocols don't see at all, and it can be also observed cheaply and safely from anywhere in the world. The natural next step is to run this continuously and add Google Play, which turns our one-day snapshot into a large ongoing observatory platform that a lot of providers can't, or that hasn't been done before. Additionally, all of our code, our raw data, and the availability metrics are open source, so anybody can take our stuff and pick up where we left off. Yeah, thanks for watching.